Now set your camp and light your fire to make your peace this day. For those who seek a road to power must fight a landless way. Hello everyone, and welcome to what is, to me at least, a very unexpected dev diary video, not talking about Hearts of Iron 4, but talking about CK3, because this is a feature I have been very interested to see, and getting some first glimpse looks at it after quite some time is giving me some questions, some things to talk about, some things to discuss. Typically when I'd go over a dev diary, I'd usually run through every bit of content, every bit of information, and really try to summarize it for people to listen to, but this time it seems that the developers have gone out of their way to make their own dev diary breakdown video on their YouTube channel. So because of that, I guess I won't over explain things here, because you can watch that there. Instead, I guess I will be breaking down my opinions and basically some things I was thinking about, some good, some neutral, some questions, and maybe some negatives, but hopefully not too many. So, with that all summed up, shall we head into a dev diary? Welcome, comrades. Did people say comrades in medieval times? That does feel like a HoI4 dev diary. Comrades. Never mind. We begin where most of the Landless gameplay is going to be taking place, which is inside of a camp. This one is the title, I guess, of the Conquerors of Barbastro, and that is basically the name of what your camp would be as your primary title, in the same way that your county, duchy, kingdom or empire would be your title. I think I've talked about this somewhere before, but I'll say it again here. I do really like what they've done with the art style. I actually think I prefer this more than what they did in Tours and Tournaments with like the 3D generated graphics for the tournaments, where you'd go to a place and it would have an entire screen. And honestly, I do wish they would take this approach, go back and redo tournaments with this style, maybe even as an option. They probably won't, but something about it feels so CK3, but maybe it's a part of me that likes the CK2 art style, and this is kind of getting closer to that original idea. So one of the original questions people had when it came to adventuring and landless gameplay is, can you just start the game as a landless adventurer? And as we can see by this big button here, create your own adventurer, it does seem that that is going to be the case. So one of the major concerns about this DLC is already solved. Good stuff. Because you start off as a random nobody who will travel across the map, I was very interested to know what exactly you're going to be doing as a landless adventurer. We already knew about contracts, which will be covered more in detail here, but it seems that the actual government domain presentation is divided into what seems to be 6 different options. Your camp can have a purpose, and the 6 purposes on offer are become wanderers, become swords of hire, become scholars, become explorers, become freebooters, and become legitimists. Now, this isn't explained in this dev diary, but they say will be explained in the next dev diary, but we can't not pontificate on what they're going to be. Swords for hire, well, that's going to be mercenaries. Some things go without saying. Become scholars seems to me a way for you to go around gaining experience, learning things, probably very heavily towards learning experience, maybe to do with languages. Become freebooters. Well, freebooters seems to be a word applicable for basically like bandit / pirate in this time period, so that's going to be a bad guy path, and having a criminal path in this DLC is very interesting, because villains and vagabonds was, to my mind, lost through the ages. To see it come back in some form here may be an early step towards actual criminal gameplay. The legitimist's path, without knowing too much, would potentially be a way for you to try and gain claims on titles, so that even if you're playing as landless, you can eventually become landed by claiming a kingdom or a duchy title and then fighting for it. As for wanderers and explorers, I really don't have too much to know. I'm not even sure what their difference would be. A wanderer maybe just travels from A to B, whatever happens will happen, kind of like a neutral objective, and explorers are looking for treasure, maybe artifacts, maybe interesting people. It's really hard to say. Until we find out next week. There's not too much else to offer, but as an early impression, I'm getting the feeling it's akin to a vague ambition for your camp, as to kind of push certain types of events to your camp so that you can play more into that playstyle. As it's described here, it seems that going from being landless to landed isn't necessarily going to be impossible to do, and can actually be a relatively short-term goal, with maybe going after a single county title and not actually being that difficult. But if you want to make the jump from being landless to a duke or a kingdom, there's going to be a lot more prep work for you to be able to do that. But moving on to something I can talk about, is they have a section for the adventuring core loop, which is explaining what exactly you're going to be doing as a landless adventurer. And before we even get out the gates, I think it's important to respect and recognize that they have recognized that this is a core gameplay loop, because in CK3 there are a series of gameplay loops. The events you get depending on what kind of lifestyle you're working towards. If you're going through an activity, you're going to have certain events that you have to go through all the time, and really picking out and making sure these events are going to be different and varied enough so that it doesn't feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again is going to be an important thing that may define the success of this entire mechanic. How well they've done it remains to be seen. The delivery method for this content is going to take the form of contracts. So these are effectively quests where you go into an innkeeper.
Your skin's as pale as the snow. Welcome to Dead Man's Drink. Here, take a look at this. Some of the Jarl's men came by and left this bounty letter.
And after that wonderful interaction with the innkeeper, you'll find yourself having a choice of something you may have to engage in. From this image alone, we can see that quests are tiered towards different types of attributes. So there's diplomacy, stewardship, intrigue, but also a cart representing travelling. With the rewards you gain from completing contracts, you can use them to upgrade your camp, so that you can get stronger to achieve whatever your major goals may be as the camp, whether it is eventually becoming landless or something else that you're trying to embark upon. What is this? Is this a dog? Is this a cat in a hat? While we see that the reward of gold can be used in your camp, the reward of prestige is seemingly used to advance your level of fame, and as you do so, you're going to get higher tiers of rulers who will offer you contracts and interactions. So it seems that having a low level of fame is going to mean that you're only going to work with counts, but if you want to start working with kings and maybe even the Byzantine emperor, you're really going to have to level up your fame. But I do have some other questions, such as, is this the only method by which a king, emperor, or anybody is going to interact with you? Let's say, for example, I choose to play as a Muslim character. I'm coming straight out of the Middle East, and I head to France. Is the King of France going to hold me in such high regard simply due to my level of fame that he's going to start offering me contracts? Because I would think that some kind of religious intolerance is probably going to mean they shouldn't want to help me or me to help them. It may be funny if you end up with a Christian ruler asking you as a Muslim to raise their child, and you convert their culture, convert their faith, and turn them into something entirely different than what they expect. It's worth briefly noting that a new type of soft mana has been added to the game in the form of provisions. I say soft because I think it's a tangible resource that actually exists in the world, so to call it the abstraction of mana, like prestige, faith and renown, isn't as fair. I think this is a lot closer to gold, and of all of the things they could have added in this form, I think this is the best. Provisions are used whenever you want to move your camp. So if you're currently chilling, let's say in India, and you want to move over to Europe, you're going to have to start building up some of those juicy apples so that you don't starve to death when travelling over. So, we can become landless adventurers, we have a camp that we can move around, we can take up contracts to get rewards in the form of gold and prestige, and what do these contracts actually do? So we can actually see one here. Hunt criminals as a tier 1 contract. 3 tiers. I'm not sure what a good one would look like, but maybe we'll find out later. Here we have 2 forms of text. If your sword arm is strong and your eye true, Count Ivan promises generous rewards in exchange for the head of a particular thug. Which seems to be more of a roleplay way of giving you the quest details. But we also have this contract requires you to slay a particular character via duel, a martial skill challenge, or just throwing men at arms at them until eventually they die. There are 2 things about this that I really like before we're even done, so this is going to be a section where I really praise what they've done. The first one is they have got the quest text in both an RP form and a straight to the point, just tell me what you want me to do. And this was something I was thinking about for the rest of the game. How many times have you been in like an event and it gives you a monolithic wall of text, and then like the options are just gives you 2 gold, lose 10 opinion, and you're like, why did I read this entire wall of text for something that wasn't really very important? And in this instance, having kind of a simplification TLDR of what's happened so I can make a quick decision about, okay, I want to do this and then get back to what I'm doing, is a really good idea. Very happy to see it implemented here. Ironically, the TLDR is actually longer than the RP section, but as a general rule of thumb for the wider game, when they have massive logs of text, having a very small TLDR at the bottom is something to bear in mind. The second thing I really like about this is their use of the duel mechanic. I was so worried that the duel mechanic was going to be forgotten and laid to rest, because personally it's one of the funnest things to kind of embark upon, is going out and fighting people to the death. It's a conscious decision which has a very serious consequence, and having it implemented here, very happy to see. Because I'm giving far too much praise, it falls upon me now to come up with something that I think they could consider. But don't worry, I've already thought of something. In your character screen, you can view the kills of your character, who you've killed, who you've murdered, who you've sent to the prison, all of it. But you cannot see who you've dueled and whether you've won or lost. And if I was to add something on the view kills screen, it could be interesting if it said view kills / duels, and they have a separate screen where it shows you every time you entered the duel screen and whether you won or lost against that person and whether they died because of you fighting them. So you have like a list of all of your great duels to look at. That could be something for them to consider. Okay, sorry, back to the dev diary. I'm rambling. Here are the rewards if you manage to kill that random person. 136 gold, opinion, prestige, and provisions. So if you want to keep moving, you probably have to do some quests. And Count Ivan is added to your roll of patrons. But we'll come back to that later. Alternatively, you could fail a quest, where you lose a bit of prestige and opinion. The most interesting thing about this image is the quest was asking for wanderers of good breeding. Now, did they mean goodly, like bred warriors, like strong warriors, or did they just mean, warriors who are good at breeding? Because I haven't gone down the intrigue tree. Never mind. The following section is an AAR, or an after action report, of a kind of hypothetical playthrough somebody did with a landless character, the contracts they may have looked at and some of the things they did. I won't spend too long on the specifics, but we can pick up some of the key notes. Here we see our protagonist in question, Mistress Shirin, and I'm not really here to talk about her, but the UI change. As you might be able to see, gold, prestige and piety have actually moved to the left of the screen instead of from the right, probably so you can fit more things in as they've added more content to the game. The real question is, have they made it so that the traits aren't going to be so claustrophobically packed in to that very small area? Maybe they've changed it, maybe they haven't, maybe they will, maybe they won't. Oh, and as an aside, because you no longer have a court, because you're living in a tent in the wilderness where you're slowly being eaten alive by rats in the middle of the night, you now don't have courtiers and now have followers, of which there are two. 2 followers. I bring this up not because of the localization change, but because of the followers in question, Lalit the Poet and Pran the Simple. Because followers are going to be basically such an integral part of your representation in the world because, well, you have no vassals anymore because you're just you. Instead, your followers are going to be your most important thing. And to really emphasize your connection between them, they've made it so they're much more likely to have interesting names, traits, personality, they're rarer to get, and you're going to be closer to them. To give the devs some praise here, I think this was such a good idea. If these people were just randomly named with random surnames, or even if they had nothing, they'd be far easier to forget. But when you've got Lalit the Poet, and he's actually a poet, and if many of the followers kind of follow this similar convention, not all of them of course, but if a good chunk of them do, it's going to be much more fun to be like, oh yes, I have my poet, my warrior, and my seducer. Following this quest is actually going to use the new scheme rework, because in case you didn't know, they've actually changed how schemes work in this game, and it's not just a invite people using gold and then you have 500 agents in your scheme. Instead, they have specific positions dedicated to whatever the scheme type is going to be. In this instance, we have a contract scheme, so not a murder scheme, not a mean scheme or a social scheme, but a contract scheme, of which you have 5 agents, and they actually have very specific jobs, Droughtsman, Bailiff, Planner, Supplier, and each of them will contribute to try and get you past the 51% chance, which probably has a greater push towards winning. Additionally, you don't randomly start the scheme on like a timed event, but you have to unlock keys that will give you the opportunity to start or execute the scheme. It's a very different shift. I can't comment on how good it is because it's just so abstractly different. You really have to play it to find out. I'm going to hold judgment out on this one way or the other, until I've played it myself, but it seems a little bit more interactive and could be more fun, but don't quote me on that. As can be expected, they've given a series of new events for your camp followers as they interact with each other, as you previously saw with courtiers. In this case, 2 of your followers are slowly becoming friends. How wholesome. Following on, the protagonist endeavours to complete another stewardship task involving settling some boundary disputes, with the opportunity to get even more provisions if they wanted to travel a long distance. I don't have too much to say about this, because it seems to be about going over there and passing some stewardship checks. What is interesting again is that we're being asked if we're a wanderer of good breeding, and I don't know how breedable our protagonist truly is. What may be worth talking about is another contract that was offered, called Eager Explorers, in which a reliable mercenary is being asked to accompany this guy, taking them from one county to another. Is this going to be an opportunity for you to move your camp from one place to another? Or maybe it's the case that you have to travel all the way back again once you've gone there. But, as we can see from this image, you're going to be using the Tours and Tournaments travel system, which is interesting because it means you're going to be able to travel to all of the points of interest that give you XP, meaning that becoming a Landless Adventurer is a good way to stack up a lot of on-map XP, so travelling around is pretty good. It would seem there are actually a great deal of contracts to talk about, so the last one I'm going to really cover, because it's not my intention to cover all of the ones they show, is the mercenary contracts, because, as we saw kind of at the beginning, there is the opportunity to play as a sword for hire, and a mercenary contract fits right into that. As we can see by the contract Stand With Us, in which a trustworthy captain is wanted to ensure that you can help him in his minus 82% war score war, so doesn't look very good for him, but if you've got a big enough army, you can probably swing the entire tides of the war in his favour. Which, in conclusion to Mistress Shirin's playthrough, she does in fact win the war on behalf of her holder by just raising her troops at her camp, travelling over, and fighting. Well fought. Beyond the gold, prestige, opinion, and provisions we've seen as repeated rewards among all the contracts, is this repeated term, the role of patrons, which is yet to be explained. It would seem that the role of patrons is effectively an open door in your yellow pages where anybody you've previously completed a contract for, you can go back to and talk to them again. From their end, you've proven yourself as being capable of completing a contract from them, but from your end, you now have access to them directly, where you can maybe ask them for some favours. At the cost of opinion, you could do things such as ask for additional reward, maybe some gold, or ask them for a marriage with one of their daughters or sons, or maybe just some straight up troops. I don't want to be too dismissive of this feature before I've seen it, because from a standstill, I mean, I understand. You complete a contract for them, you go back to them, you ask them for a favour, it's kind of a one-to-one, but it could also be very frustrating if you spend your time trying to gain favour with one particular person, maybe the King of Poland, you live in Poland, you work and do contracts in Poland, but then the King of Poland dies, and any of that good favour you've gained as a patron is just instantly evaporated. Maybe there could be a chance of a patron inheritance on the off chance you've done a particularly good job, just kind of throwing around a ballpark in case something goes wrong, but I'll wait and see before I pass further judgment. Well, well, well. If it isn't the Villains and Vagabonds DLC, I didn't think you'd be rearing your ugly head. With the A Life of Crime section, it does start to make me wonder, is this some of the intention they had originally when they were offering the choice between what DLCs you wanted and we got Wards and Wardens? Was this the alternative? With this, we see the introduction of the criminal contract. These are dirty, red, and much more sinister looking contracts. In this case, you can ambush a traveller. The description says this contract requires you to travel to a distant holding, waylaying characters to take their gold as you go via prowess, martial, or intrigue. It is a criminal contract, and you will gain gold dependent on who you meet during that contract. And, which we'll talk about in a sec, you gain the Gallowsbait trait. I think it's very, very, very cool that the idea of playing a criminal is now much more entrenched in the gameplay loop. We see kind of some of it come up from time to time. You can do things like murder people and be seen as a criminal, but it's not necessarily a playstyle, and you can be excommunicated from the faith, but it's kind of just a hindrance. It's not a playstyle. This is a playstyle. This is something you choose to do and pursue for rewards. Really, really cool stuff. For the most part, we've only really seen contract tiers level 1, so I'm not sure how crazy some of these contracts could be. I will say that when it wants you to do a prowess check, does that equal duel check? Because going around and literally dueling people to the death for all they possess on the road is something I would very much so enjoy for this kind of playstyle. A second thing to consider is, it's interesting how it's people offering you to be a nuisance in their land, or are people paying you money to be a nuisance in somebody else's land? Because the one thing I would consider about this is, couldn't you yourself choose to do this? Like, why do I need a contract to be told to go harass people on the road? If I choose to pursue the life of being a criminal, can't I choose when I want to start sort of set up my camp? Anybody who passes my camp, I steal money from them? Maybe I'm misinterpreting how it's interacting here, but I just thought it was funny how the only path I can see that you can become a criminal is by people paying you to be a criminal. In the world of CK3, there is no petty crime, only organised crime, straight from the top. As you continue to complete criminal contracts, you'll unlock the Gallowsbait trait, which is a negative trait, kind of similar to the Scarred trait, in which the level 1 version of it isn't too bad, but as you continue to level different parts of it, you may find yourself getting negative debuffs. Although maybe some of them are good, we only have this one image to work off. There are bandits, tricksters, thieves, poachers and marauders, and a trickster at level 4 gives you -5 opinion, but courtier and guest opinion cancelled out, and courtly vassal opinion down. It would seem that becoming a trickster just mean everyone hates you. I guess there's not too much love for magicians in this world. I am, however, far more interested in actually all of the other different paths. I mean, what does a bandit do better than a marauder? To my mind, they're actually kind of similar, but maybe a marauder's straight up more violent. A poacher makes more sense because if you have the option to hunt, then hunting somewhere you're not allowed to is going to gain you the poacher trait. And as for the thief, is there an option for you to start stealing things in a certain way? Maybe it gives you some hostile scheme bonus. One thing can be said for certain. Some people are going to be doing criminal-only gameplay, max level Gallowsbait, excommunicated, hated by the world. I look forward to it. Maybe there's a major decision where if you max level every single path, you can get some legendary name known as like the King of Crime or something. I'm just throwing ideas around, but that's a lot of traits for you to try and max, that maxing them all feels like it could be a reward. However, if you find yourself becoming a criminal and you want to kind of get rid of it, there is a decision to wipe the slate clean and remove the trait. It even gives you the option to decide which specific branches you want to clean, or if you want to remove the trait entirely at the cost of gold and prestige. There is one final note of kind of strange interaction. If you complete this burn property quest, you gain 10 experience in the Gallowsbait trait. But is it not the intention that when you do something nefarious and negative, if you don't want to be found out, you shouldn't be gaining experience in Gallowsbait because you haven't been found out? In this instance, we're supposed to have committed an arson. Is the intention that we're supposed to be known to have committed the arson? Because if any of these illegal quests involve you having to do some form of espionage, if the success chance gives you experience in Gallowsbait, to me that doesn't make sense. Surely the failure state is that you gain negative experience. I guess it depends on some of the wording, and if wanting to level Gallowsbait is your intention. God, I'm doing an awful lot of yapping. Trying to speed things up a bit, I'll just briefly talk about some of the images that they've shown for different things you can work with. One type of building that you can add to your camp is the baggage train. This is important to show off now, but it will be brought up later on. Using it, it actually comes with quite a lot of upgrades for level 4, including max size of your MAA regiments by a significant margin. +3 for 4 different types is nothing to be scoffed at. It would seem that if you're trying to build a mercenary band, building up a large baggage train is going to be quite an important building for just all sections. Supply capacity so you can travel with the army, provisions capacity so you can travel further distance with your camp. It all seems to help. Speaking of provisions, if you find yourself running out of provisions, the game seems to handle it quite kindly by allowing you to die. Okay, maybe not so straightforward as being able to die, but you starve to death is at a 12%, and it seems that all of the other options are pretty negative too. I actually quite like this. It's a good amount of classic CK RNG, but not so hard strong of an instant failure state if something goes wrong. The next section is a little tidbit about some of the types of upgrades you can find for camp buildings. Because there are going to be different types of playstyle between being a criminal, being a mercenary, being a wanderer, you know, the 6 types we saw at the start, you may have to change your buildings around depending on what your intention is, unlike how it kind of is now, where once you've got some buildings, you just upgrade them and you seldom swap them out. Here, for example, we can see 2 what I believe are upgrades that you can choose to go for. I'm not sure if they're mutually exclusive or you can do both of them, but they require gold and kind of happen instantly. The knowledgeable herbalist seems to give you help with murder schemes, so maybe this is more useful if you're going for a more criminal playstyle, but the mobile brewers gives you courtier opinion and a good chunk of gold, so perhaps this is useful if you're trying to garner a larger collection of interesting followers. It also gives you extra options for a camp revelry activity, which I think we'll briefly talk about later. Alternatively, some buildings you can choose between are the reference corpus, which is, I mean, this could be a ridiculously overpowered building depending on the circumstance. It gives you plus 25 lifestyle experience, plus 25% experience per month. So base stat, you gain 25. This gives you another 25, so we're doubled before we've even begun. Plus the 25% that the building gives you as a percentage, that takes you up to 62.5 per month. If we were to assume that you had a level 4 learning trait, that sticks you up to 82.5 experience, and with anything like quick, intelligent or genius, you should be able to push it over the edge and get to over 100. In short, you can gain 1 learning experience perk per year. Well, I'm sure that building's not overpowered at all. Alternatively, we have the Mortician's Tools, and while maybe not as overpowered as the one above it, is interesting in what it says. Gain gold from your battle victories and any battles that end in the county of your camp. So, wherever you placed your camp, whichever county you've placed it in, or barony I suppose, you gain gold if a battle happens there. While we don't know how much gold you're going to get from this to judge how worthy it is to do, it does make it interesting to think about, where do most battles happen in CK3? It would be interesting if somebody organised an experiment, I have no idea how you would do this, that created a heat map that every time a battle took place in a CK3 campaign, it kind of added a number into that barony, and then over the course of a playthrough, we could see on average where some of the major hotspots for battles were, so that if you were choosing to place down your camp, you would have some kind of knowledge of where exactly a lot of battles are likely to happen. On average, one would imagine that like de jure county capitals are going to be a major place. Also islands, like single barony islands, where there literally is only one place that a battle could take place in that location. Maybe like the Isle of Man. Very interesting to think about, no idea how strong it is. Another mechanic they're adding, which I don't really have too much to talk about, is camp temperament, where basically depending on what type of followers you've brought in and what their current feelings are regarding the current situation, they're going to be positive or negative, and that will affect the entire temperament. A positive temperament will give you positive buffs, negative. As we can see here, we have 3 supporters of the camp, giving us some army toughness and contract scheme growth, and 2 detractors, giving us minus 20% army damage. That is so terrible. Like minus 20 is awful. You do not want detractors. Kill them all. Something I really didn't expect to come out of this DLC was an overhaul to many of the perks inside of the lifestyle perk tree. They're not necessarily changing the tree or adding a new one yet, but they're changing it so that if you're landless, many of the perks that aren't applicable to landless play are now going to be with changed text. The first one comes in the form of the diplomat tree with Run Away With Me. So scheme secrecy goes up, and you can do the elope scheme on non-lovers, and it's got a higher % chance of happening. I do like this perk, but I hate where they've put it, because if you didn't know, where that perk is supposed to be is Accomplished Forger, which helps you fabricate claims faster. Useless for landless characters, but the second thing it does is allows you to fabricate claims on artifacts. As a result of them replacing this perk, if you wanted to maybe, I don't know, fabricate a claim for some legendary sword, you can't do that. It's simply not possible. There is a chance, of course, that they've moved it over to somewhere else, or there's another mechanic that's been added to help you do this in a different way. But as it stands right now, not being able to fabricate artifact claims is such a disappointment to me. Yeah, really negative. And to be brutally honest, I don't know why the elope is in the diplomatic tree to begin with. Surely there are far more applicable things where this would have made more sense. A diplomat eloping? Isn't that like the opposite of good diplomacy? Isn't that like reduction of diplomacy and it's more like intrigue and subterfuge? Yeah, I disagree with its placement for many reasons. In the Theologian branch, we see the Fateful perk, which has kept the same titling, but has got an additional bonus where if you've got the Steadfast Camp Temperament, which is the one where people like you, you gain +5 Faith Hostility advantage. Pretty good if you're going on Crusade. In the Scholar tree, you may find that Inspiration is everywhere, meaning that you're going to get +200% Seasoned Traveler trait experience gain, which is probably quite a tremendous amount, but if you're traveling everywhere anyway, I've never found it too difficult to gain Traveler experience gain, especially for something that's going to be 7 perks down, and followers will occasionally become inspired to write books. So we can sponsor inspirations in a camp, but I wonder what those books are going to be about. Next up, we have what to me could be one of the best ideas they've gone with this. In the Torture path, crime pays. Criminal contract gold rewards +100%. On reflection, it seems so obvious that the Torture path, which as far as I have seen is probably one of the weakest paths because the amount of times you're actually wanting to torture people is very minimal. It doesn't do you any favours to be hated, but making it so it has the additional utility of being the criminal path is such a stroke of genius that I actually think it could extend into just basic landed gameplay. It doesn't just need to be the torture path, it could be the criminal path as well. In the Theologian tree, we have something that might have sparked up quite a bit of discussion. The Wandering Missionary has changed its localization, but it seems to have the original faith creation and reformation cost shift. What's different is you now have the ability to convert with people in your camp and in the domain that your camp is located in. Additionally, whenever you try to attempt to convert people, you gain prestige for doing so. So you effectively can have a new gameplay experience where you go from realm to realm trying to convert people to a religion that maybe you've founded or reformed. So that sounds like some Jesus gameplay to me. The last change they show us here is in the Scholar branch. Take the custom where it comes. And this is very cool. Men-at-Arm recruitment cost down. Well, that's always good because we're pretty poor. Wanderer trait experience gain. That's pretty good as well. It's good that it's higher up, not 7 perks down. And most importantly, may recruit cultural men-at-arms from where you are located. Oh my goodness. This means you can become a landerer, an unlanded in Europe, get your ass all the way down to India. Hello sir, I would like to buy some elephants, and get your ass all the way back to Europe, and suddenly you have elephants in Europe. It is time for some Hannibal gameplay. They thought they could depose me. I have returned, and I have brought tusks and trunks with me. I am quite excited to do some ivory gameplay, in case you hadn't noticed, and I think that this could be a very welcome addition to the game. Such a good idea. It was mentioned earlier, as we move on, that there was a new activity in the form of hosting a camp revelry. This is a replacement to a feast because since you have no domain, you don't have anywhere to hold a feast in the same way you can't hold a grand tournament in the middle of nowhere. So some activities are no longer available to you, but you can host a revelry, which gives you stress loss, much kind of as you would expect with a feast, but also some additional things like the chance to gain skill points, contracts, artifacts, and followers. To combine two things we were talking about earlier, we were looking at different types of buildings you can build, and I mentioned that they had upgrades, and also we were talking about Jesus gameplay. Well, the baggage train building has a couple of upgrades in the form of the portable shrine and the loyal scribes. With this, you can now start demanding conversion from people and get a camp priest. It seems then that there are a new series of court positions that you can have, although I guess they're not court positions but camp positions this time, as well as some pretty good buffs across the board, learning contract rewards plus 50% and learning per level of fame. The Jesus gameplay may go very hard. The last thing I'm going to talk about before I shoot over some comments and give some closing thoughts is that the way Succession works with camps is now just a straight up designation. It doesn't even have to be somebody of your blood, which basically means every time that you want to create an heir, it's going to happen. Losing is going to be pretty difficult. Personally, I'm not too sure how I feel about the idea that you can just elect some random nobody to carry on your dynasty's name, but at least if nothing else, when you choose to designate somebody from your camp to be your heir, they will create their own new house. And this is probably not something I'm going to do, because to me, CK3 feels like the continuation of a bloodline, not kind of an abstract dynasty name. And with that, we have reached the end of this dev diary. So, some interesting stuff across the board there, and some stuff we haven't covered because I don't want to spend too long. Interesting things I'm wondering. Can you do looting and raiding? Like raise your camp as raiders and just go raid people like you are a Norse tribal, or if you have the practiced piracy cultural tradition? I'm very interested to know how that would work. Equally, we saw that there is a poacher path in the trait, the criminal trait, so you can host a hunt wherever you want because you don't need to own any territory. But how far is the hunts that you can host? I wonder if they've retained a form of diplomatic range and how useful that's going to be, because if I go hunt somewhere, can I go across the map and hunt in Africa when I'm in Europe? So, I don't know, kind of interesting to consider. But, let's take a look at some questions and some answers from the devs. Sandwich8 asked a nice question, which is, what is the compelling goal for a landless adventurer? Is there something more than eventually becoming landed? I think I touched on this earlier when I was thinking about, can you complete all of the criminal trait to get like a major decision? And they say yes. There is a selection of major decisions for landless characters to work towards and a general loop of bettering your camp, but they'll talk about those decisions next time. We'll see if I'm disappointed. Agamide asks, could you give us a ballpark on how many quest types there are? If we're sacrificing interacting with adventurers, how much do we gain in variety? And they actually tell us straight up, there's going to be 49 contract types 26 basic ones. I assume they're like the stewardship, diplomacy, etc. ones. 4 dedicated to warfare, so I'm guessing this is like the mercenary contracts. Oh, it actually says hired as mercenaries. 8 types of transport, so traveling your camp from one place to another. And 11 misc, which is strange. We don't know what that means. Initial reaction does kind of worry me. 49 contracts. That to me does sound like it is entirely possible that you could do quite a lot of them in a single lifetime. It is of course not my intention to ring the bells of dread just yet, but 49 does seem like a relatively low number. Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised, maybe I won't be. Thanks to Menzie, we actually have a bit of a spoiler. So excited about being a mercenary. I'd like to ask if we could become an order of knights too, to which not specifically supported, although there is one major decision next week along those lines. Interesting. Founding an order of knights. What could that mean? Dual Ninja asks something which may be kind of by the wayside, but is interesting very briefly to talk about. Why can't we be pirates in CK3? He says it's because of the naval mechanics, and they say no, there's not going to be a proper navy system currently in the game, which I'm fine with. However, I am actually thinking, do we need a navy system for the presentation of pirates? Because I was never thinking about this as naval combat. When I think about pirates, I'm thinking about the idea that you present your camp in the sense that you are exclusively a bandit camp with the goal of raiding and looting and doing that sort of thing. So the idea that this won't be presented, and I guess the only form of criminality you're going to do is in the form of contracts, is, as I said earlier, there is only organized crime in CK3. You can't just do a crime, which might be a bit disappointing if raiding isn't available to you. And finally, Jose2534 asks, will we be able to get special ones as adventurers to do some kind of archaeology tomb robbing in Egypt? This was something I actually wanted. When I was first thinking about adventuring, I was thinking, can you go to Egypt and rob the pyramids? To which they say, no, you cannot do this. Disappointing. But there are some artifact-related contracts, so maybe there will be something in this kind. When we saw the original 6 things that your camp can do, one of them was exploring. If there's an intention for us to become explorers, and we're not exploring the pyramids, what are we exploring? What is there to discover if not treasure? I'm very, very curious. But I think that is far too much Dev Diary for one day. I'm sure there's 100 more things to be said, but my initial reaction is very, very cautious optimism. I think that I guess a few too many possibly fun playthroughs have kind of fell through the cracks, maybe because of time constraints or maybe because they didn't work very well mechanically, but a lot of positive, unexpected things are in there too. While I can't guarantee I will be covering next week's Dev Diary, I guess it really depends on what kind of content they put in there, I did want to give some kind of initial reaction to what I thought about Landless gameplay, as I very much intend on playing it when it releases. So, with that being said, I'll say thank you very much for watching this strange video. If you liked, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time? It's almost harvesting season.